are rolling, darkness falls. Inside the GM Studios halls, tabletop games where nightmares creep, in a realm where sanity is lost and weak. Welcome to the abyss, where dreams shatter. Inside the GM Studio, nothing else matters. Blood and chaos, the dark arts unfold, in the realm of role-playing, where legends are told.
Well, hello there, gamers and gamettes. Welcome to the side question episode of Inside the GM Studio, where we field questions from the internets for your listening pleasure. I am your host, David.
I'm Matt.
And I'm going to do that clicky-clack roll. Crit fumble, bro. I got a 1.
Okay. 1, easy to find, top of the list. All right. So this one comes from Putrid7 at our Ask Game Masters with the question, in brackets here, D&D 5e, in regards to speeding up combat. I'm trying to decide if it would be beneficial or fun to implement a rule, one that has players hitting a DC higher than an enemy's AC by a certain amount. For example, maybe 5 or 10 higher than the target's AC results in an instant kill on enemies that are below a certain CR. I see. Hold on, let me see if I can read this sentence one more time. For example, maybe 5 or 10 higher than the target's AC results in an instant kill on enemies that are below a certain CR. What do you think?
Okay, so it's like saying they're just going to make a check to see if they can kill an enemy that's below a certain challenge rating.
Kind of. I see that, like, if you make an attack roll and you know, in your total is 5 or 10 higher than the target's AC, then if the challenge rating is below for your party, maybe it's an instant kill.
I don't have a problem with some sort of insta-kill mechanic to speed up the game. However, I think that's a little more obtuse than it needs to be. You could just say that critical hits kill enemies below the party's level for challenge rating. Or something.
I like that. That's a good one.
It'd be much easier, right? And so do recognize, though, that will kind of sap some of the drama out of every combat encounter because... I mean, even the party's level, like a level 5, a challenge rating 5 monster. So maybe something like the party's level minus 2 or 3 or something like that.
Yeah.
Like the challenge rating equal to 2/3 the party's level or something like that. Then just have it be contingent on critical hits because those are just already baked into the mechanic. Or if you wanted to speed things up, just up the damage output of the... critical hit mechanic. Instead of having players roll an extra damage, just say their weapons do, max damage plus whatever, plus a D6 or D8 or, whatever. But I don't know that that's actually the best way for you to speed up combat. If you're trying to speed up combat, I suspect the problem is that you're probably including too many enemies.
Yes.
More enemies mean more time. They mean more turns. They mean more, like, dice mechanics. They mean more math. Try fewer enemies that are more challenging, and the party will have to throw a lot of resources at them to defeat them, but that will also kind of speed things up, and it'll give the party really interesting things to do where they have to throw a lot of resources. I'm a bigger fan of this. Fewer combat encounters, but higher stakes. The enemies are challenging, and maybe there's only 2 or 3 of them, as you have a party of 4 or 5. But if you start getting up to more enemies than there are members of the party, more enemies than there are party members, then you need to tweak with the challenge. One enemy should be really, really hard, like a demon or a dragon or something. And then 1 for 1. Beyond that, having simple enemies, if you wanted to go like a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 to the party ratio, then yeah, you need to speed it up and you need to figure out a way to just have them be um, be easily dispatched with. You could just take the fourth edition minions rule if you wanted to do
Mhm.
that. Just have they each have just a hit. If they get hit, they're dead, and then you don't need to kind of track hit points for them. You just track their numbers. But there's other tactics too that you can use to speed up combat. Matt had one that I never really put in place because I never had slow combat mechanics, but um, basically just priming the players to kind of pay a little bit more close attention, knowing that their turn is coming up next. You
Yep.
say such and such, it's your turn. Prime the players to be prepared with an economy of actions. Players typically think about what they want to use their action for and don't give much thought about where their movement's going, whether they're going to use a reaction when it's not their turn, whether they're going to use an object, and whether they're going to use a bonus action. Try to cement in the players' minds that all of these things they need to kind of have prepared. Reactions, especially. Try to think through when it's not your turn
Mhm.
what you would be using your reaction for, and if you're going to use it, interject as quickly as possible. Then tell the next player, like, okay, Matt, it's your turn, and Cody, you're on deck. Start
Yep.
thinking about what it is that you want to do. The battlefield's not likely to change too much between the time that like Matt starts his turn and the time that you start your turn. So you should have a pretty good idea of what it is you're going to be doing. Then they'll have this all like laid out, and they'll be able to kind of speak quicker and kind of get through their turn faster. You can also simplify the variety of enemies. If you don't want to simplify uh, the number of enemies, then simplify the types of enemies. If you have a group of monsters that's like an ogre, three hobgoblins, five goblins, and six kobolds, that's too many groups of enemies. Just go like, okay, there are 15 goblins, right? Or there's, a hobgoblin leader and 12 goblins. Then you only have two groups of enemies that are doing things. And another way to simplify things would be to limit the amount of spellcasters that are in any given encounter. Think hard about whether a spellcaster is appropriate because
Mm.
spellcasters eat up more time because they have more options of things that they're going to do.
Mhm.
Whereas something like an ogre just has one big club that does a lot of damage, and that's all he can do. And so he's just bludgeoning the shit out of your party and causing lots of damage in the process. So spellcasting is complicates matters, especially if you were using an alternate variant rule where dragons can spellcast. And suddenly it's like now dragons can spellcast. Now they have like legendary actions. They have a breath weapon. They have a bite. They have a
They
claw.
have
They have a
layer
tail. They have
actions.
wing attack. They have layer actions. It's like dragons are supposed to be tough, but um, if it's all condensed into one enemy, that's fine. But make it easy for yourself to kind of understand that the challenge here is that there's a lot of enemies for the party to face. It doesn't really mean that they need to have a lot of options available to them. Um, Limit the variety of enemies, the number of enemies. Try to cement in your players' economy of action for expediency, and I think you'll find that your battles are a little more uh,
Mm.
action heavy and they go a lot quicker. But I don't have a problem with a mechanic that does that. But again, kind of to our main episode this week, you should think hard about whether this is something you want to do because it will probably have unintended consequences. And one of them might be that enemies that, you can like one shot kill enemies that maybe are not supposed to be one shot killed. And that would just sap the um, story. If you're going to have some challenge rating where the party can kill them automatically, then by definition, if you want a battle to be challenging, they have to be all enemies have to be above that challenge rating, and that's going to pose some encounter building challenges for you.
Mm. I would say, so I'm with David on, especially if you want a large group, but you want it to go quickly, use the minion mechanic from fourth edition.
Hmm.
Um, it doesn't always work well because I'll tell you what, in fourth edition, one of the main reasons I came up with the you're on deck situation was because every combat encounter in fourth edition was 3 to 4 hours long. It was more like 2 to 3, but it
Yeah.
felt long. It was really long. Even though minions were in there and they only had one hit point, there's so much shit you could do. And it's kind of moved over to 5th edition where encounters take anywhere from half an hour. If they are real big encounters, it could take close to, but definitely not 4th edition bad.
Yeah.
I would say if you're doing stuff like this, if they're level 1, that's really hard. You are just going to have to work with minion rules. Give half of the, if you got, like David was saying, if you got some goblins and kobolds together, maybe make all the kobolds 1 hit point, and the goblins might have, if there's more than 3 of them and you got a 5-person group, you know, and there's 5 kobolds and say 5 goblins, maybe drop it down to 3 goblins. Is it going to be too easy? It's possible, but still, nobody's going to be dropping. Nobody's going to have to do big heals or taking short rests, and they should be able to carve through these things pretty quickly. As soon as you get higher in levels with challenge rating, you can start making mobs. Like as soon as you get to level 5, a kobold, a level 5 fighter can go through 3 of those things if he's dual wielding in one turn. So you can start thinking about that. I was also thinking about increasing the speed of the NPCs trying to get their turns over with, or even the PCs when they're going through the enemies. Maybe what you can have is, if you want some to have the minion rules, just let them have 1 hit point, again like the kobolds, but you flavor them to be, you know, human thugs. And maybe if you want hobgoblins in there with some goblins, maybe do like, instead of them rolling for damage every single time, if you want to have multiple of them, give them, you know, fewer hit points, but make them do only like 3 points of damage each time, because if they continue to down players and there's healing and all this other stuff, we have to go do this, I got to go revivify him, or I got to go do a mess and check on him, you know, that's going to, like you said, it takes a long time in between. It's going to prolong this combat. The on deck really worked out at a table. VTT probably not. It could. I've never tried it online. Yeah. I've only done it live, because it also, you know, my players, I'd be like, hey, it's your turn, and just like, oh, what did, you know, the guy before me, what did he do? So it's like, weren't you paying attention? Oh, sorry, man. You know, I was off on my own. I was thinking about what I was going to do. And when I told them, hey, you're on deck, they all of a sudden started to pay attention to what the player right before them did, or even the enemy right before them did. Yeah. So it really just got them back in the game real quick.
There's some important considerations to think about too. One, larger groups of enemies are more manageable quickly when you have spellcasters or anybody that has any AoE capabilities. So if you have a lot of AoE, then maybe, you know, low level enemies are okay to have a lot of them. This is a tactic that I kind of I always try to instill in new players. When you have a large group of enemies, the key is reducing the number of enemies.
Yep.
So like if your cohort next to you just hit this guy for 8 points of damage, don't attack a different enemy than him. Attack the same enemy, even if you're wasting a little bit of damage, because you just pulled one enemy out of the fight. And a numbers advantage, like even if they're really, really weak enemies, like a 2 or 3 or 4 to 1 advantage is just like, not only is it a huge advantage, but it's also just a time suck. Another way that you can kind of try to have some AoE capabilities, as they were, for melee characters, if you have more of those, is to institute kind of a splash damage rule, where you have a bunch of enemies that are near, and say you have a great weapon fighter who hits a kobold. He only has 1 attack a round, but he does like somewhere between 8 and 12 points of damage, or 10 and 15 points of damage with a greatsword. It's kind of a wasted attack on a kobold that's only got like 2 or 3 hit points.
Yeah, on a good day.
Right. But if you just say, okay, you just caused 12 points of damage to this kobold, it just the spillover damage goes to the next enemy, and if it kills him, it goes to the next enemy until you're out of damage. That allows some heroic capabilities, and also makes your player feel cool, because he's like this great weapon fighter, and in his head, he's like, look, I just did 16 points of damage. So I just walk up and I just cut through fucking like 5 kobolds. Like,
yeah.
So that's not only really cool for cinematic purposes, but it's also a fairly easily instituted game mechanic for melee combatants. And so you need to think about your party's ability to manage large groups, because if you have, frankly, like if you just had a bunch of rogues, a horde of enemies would just fucking annihilate them, because the rogue is all about causing a lot of damage to one enemy at a time. So is the warlock and the sorcerer to a lesser degree. All about causing their strikers A to B damage, 1 to 1. So they do very well against big enemies like dragons and giants and shit, where they have a ton of hit points. And it's like, I just did 36 points of damage to this guy. But 36 points of damage to a hobgoblin is fucking wasted, right? He's
Yeah.
annihilated. So you could institute that. I believe that alternate rule is in the DMG, and it's pretty easy to kind of put in place. But you could even, if you gear down, you just say, okay, monsters below a certain challenge rating or whatever, they're throwaway enemies, and I'm just going to basically say that they're minions, and then I institute the splash over damage rule. Then even a fighter or someone, a rogue, could dispatch with a decent amount of them. It makes the encounter more dynamic, and it makes it more fast paced. So that, just some kind of thoughts on that. If you have spellcasters in particular, bigger hordes of enemies might be okay, especially if they have low level spells that can dispatch with them, or even like a cantrip like Acid Splash, or what's the cleric one that's basically like all enemies adjacent. Just a low level
Yeah.
amount of damage to a lot of enemies can be beneficial, if you're not going to up the overall challenge of each, of fewer enemies with a greater challenge.
I also want to bring up the positive parts if you want to do like the minion rules, where you just have some stuff with 1 hit point come flying at the players. That even in 4th edition, minions didn't they only do like 1 to 2 points of damage each time?
Yeah, it would usually just kind of take a static, like, 1 to 3 somewhere in there.
Yeah.
They wouldn't even roll. They wouldn't roll damage. They just do damage.
Cinematically, these things can be really cool too. Like, you go into a dragon's lair, they might come up and they see the dragon, and the dragon looks down on them and says, "You're not even worth my time," and sends some whelplings or some kobolds or even some other type of dragonkin at them. Sends like 10 to 12, but they're all 1 hit point creatures that only do 2 to 3 points of damage, and they're going up against a dragon in a lair. That means that they're pretty much up there. They're going to go through these things really fucking quick, especially if you did things like David was saying, where you do the splash attacks and the spellcasters are doing AoEs. You can make it feel super cinematic and make them feel super badass, and then they stand in front of this giant dragon, and it makes the story feel grander, not just another fucking dragon. This time
You
it
can-
felt
you-
really good.
You can just kind of tinker with some rules for like kind of a horde attack too, where you go, okay, there's a horde of these enemies. There's a horde of kobolds, and what I'm going to do is just make 1 attack for the entire horde.
Yep.
And apply it to each player that is within range, right? So they're all in the midst of the horde, and you're going to make 1 horde attack, and I apply it to Matt's armor class, I apply it to Cody's armor class, I apply it to Patrick's armor class. And for each one of them it hits, depending on how many, like, what their share is. So, like, they're outnumbered 2 to 1, then they take 2, each player that's hit takes 2 damage. If they're outnumbered 3 to 1, then they each take 3 damage. And if they're outnumbered 4 to 1 or 5 to 1, they take 4 or 5 damage if the attack would hit. Then you're just making 1 attack for a horde, and you're not rolling damage. You're just applying it to who it hits based on how outnumbered they are. And then it's the player's turn, right? You don't need to go through. I mean, you have a horde of 15 kobolds, and you're making 15 attack rolls and 15 damage rolls if you hit with those. That just really, really bogs everything down, when in all reality, it's probably to have almost the same net result as that tactic, because you're looking at the minions more like set pieces than you are enemies. If you're going to do that, then reserve the enemies. Just try to think of another way you can make them a set piece or a flavor, as opposed to like an actual enemy that's worthy of, like, a particular, like, initiative count and damage output and armor class or whatever. And similarly, you could even just have it, rather than killing enemies of a certain CR, you could just have like, okay, these enemies are horde enemies, and when the players hit them, then they just they do damage like in Barbarians of Limerick. They just kill X amount of however much damage they do, or they just kill X amount if they hit whatever. And so they're not rolling damage, and they're not whatever doing all this other complicated stuff. It's so just streamlining the economy of actions for the bigger groups, and then limiting the amount of groups. You probably shouldn't need to do that if your only goal is to try to have your combat go faster.
Let's read some of the comments here. There's not very many. And I love this top one by 81 Ranger that just says, so 5e wasn't designed to have fast combat. And that was it. That's the whole comment. But Laz the Infamous says, I get what you're laying down, but it adds a layer of complexity in an already complex game. If you want to speed up combat, give the opponents less HP, or swipe from 4th edition and have minions. Minions have individual attacks, damage, and AC, but only 1 hit point. Yep, so see, we are right. Garner Adam says, instead of making a broad rule change, I suggest you implement the change in the form of an oil that players can put on their weapons. First, the players discover the oil, they use it, and you get valuable in-game experience with it. If you really like the change, you could have players research how to craft the oil themselves. Now, the rule change is in-game without it actually changing the rules. What do you think of that?
That's a contingency where, I mean, it is changing the rules, because if the players always have access to this, then why not just say that their weapons are more powerful?
Right, just give them a +1 weapon.
Or just give them a weapon that does an extra weapon damage. Yeah. Like, but then...
Well, fuck it, just give them a Vorpal weapon.
Yeah, it's just that's gonna escalate the power ladder, so to speak. And now when you want to have more challenging enemies for a more challenging, more drawn out fight, now you have to make them that much more challenging. Yeah, give them fewer hit points, whatever the low end of what's the minimum hit points that this creature would have. Just give them that if you want it to be easier to kill them, but just recognize that certain battles are meant to be a little more protracted because they're supposed to have drama. So you would try to build your encounters in a way that suit the purpose that they are supposed to serve, instead of trying to change the challenge ratings or the core mechanics. Try to just build an encounter that is what you need it to be. It's a lot of very easy enemies. It's one really challenging enemy. It's a wolf pack of moderate enemies. It's a commander and troops. And then just tailor what it is you need them to be. And don't, like we were talking about on the main episode, flavor doesn't matter. If you have a group of bandits, and the party's going to siege a group of bandits, and you go like, well, the bandit stat block as such is just use the kobold stat block and just say you look like a bandit. Who cares, right? It doesn't matter unless there's something inherent. Obviously, don't give like some human like a breath weapon attack or like a spore attack that makes no sense. But if they're just melee combatants, or they're just mobile combatants, or they're just range combatants, why can't an archer scout and his damage output just be a warlock with Eldritch Blast? He can. So don't be hemmed in and thinking that you need to change the core mechanics, when maybe just building smarter encounters, and flavoring them in a way that seems thematically appropriate can achieve the same result.
Here's a little list that a commenter put. Things I have done to speed up combat. And let's see what you think, David. 1, giving enemies extra vulnerabilities. Yay or nay?
Nay.
I'm gonna say nay. Again, that's fucking with the rules a little too much. That I don't think it's gonna work out. Reduced HP of low level minions. Yes, easy enough.
Yes. Easy enough.
Give AC and hit points info of enemies to players. This I've never been a fan of. I don't see, it doesn't give you a bonus to anything other than they can roll and say, yes, I hit. But you're just kind of giving them a pass to just roll a die, not really even look at it and be like, yeah, I hit.
Well, what it does is it would inform the players, like if you have a variety of enemies that have a variety of different armor classes or vulnerabilities or resistances, you would be arming the players with that knowledge so they could decide who they wanted to attack. right?
That
It's the
is
same
true.
way. It's the same way if you let them know what their hit point total is. This monster has 1 hit point left. Um, and again, if you're on the camp of like reducing enemies, you might go, okay, he's only got if I hit that do all, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to take my main attack at this guy, and then my offhand attack, which only does a D4, is going to hit him, so that I'm not wasting any damage. That allows the players to kind of decide who they're attacking, when they're attacking them, and what their likelihood of success is. But that tactic can often it seems like it empowers players to make more deliberate decisions, but they
Hmm.
can also get bogged down in strategy and analysis paralysis
Yeah.
as to like what the most efficient way is. And ironically, they end up wasting a lot of time in the name of efficiency.
Mm. This one I kind of like. Spend inspiration to auto hit low level minion. I kind of dig that. That's a good idea. Depends on
Yeah.
how much you get inspiration, or do you also uh, do you uh, do you put in there with bardic inspiration, because that can make it kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
like David was saying before,
Or inspiration to crit or something like that.
oh
Like
yeah, see that, there you go. That's not breaking anything too big. It actually
yep.
works out quite well.
Yeah.
And this one, David kind of brought up before: make an extra attack after killing small minion slash mob.
Hmm.
Kind of like what you're saying with the kobolds. You go through one. You rolled 18 points of damage. Each kobold is 3 hit points. Sure,
Yeah.
you take out 2 or 3.
Yeah. Or just splash the damage over. Like,
Yeah,
okay, they each have 2 or 3 hit points, and you go, okay, you just did three, now you're down to 15 damage. You did three more, that down to now you're down to 12, and down
hmm,
and until your damage is all gone. It works like a lot like a sleep spell works, right? It just affects
yeah.
the lowest level enemies, and then just keeps spending that damage until you're out, and you don't have enough to kill the last enemy. You have 3 points of damage left. He's got 4 hit points left. He doesn't, he takes three, but is not dead.
All right. Uh, I think that's going to do it for this episode. You got anything to add on to there, David?
No, it kind of dovetailed with our main episode topic
Yeah,
this
right.
week.
It
It was kind of
worked pretty
coincidental.
well. That's nice. Yeah, if you're just listening to this and you're not listening to the main show, shame on you, first of all. We're in Mechanics Month right now. We just started today of the recording. We did it. So listen to the main show, you fucking weirdos. What are you doing? But yeah, all right. Otherwise, I think we'll just leave this one on a good night.
And good luck.